Welcome back to StoryTube, everybody, and welcome to the beginning of our festive season. You might have been led to believe by my attire that I'm about to talk about something cozy, Christmassy, maybe Star Warsy, but that isn't correct. I simply felt like wearing a Christmas jumper because we put up our tree yesterday, and who cares that it's still November. I am in fact here to talk about The Year of the Locust by Terry Hayes, which is a gritty, epic spy thriller. Or is it? This is going to be a non-spoiler review in terms of all your usual plot points, specific what happens in the book. However, I am going to talk about how Terry Hayes uses genre here, and specifically about how he blends genre, because even though this is advertised as a spy thriller and you will find it in your crime thriller sections of bookshops, it's not quite as simple as that. And I think that is a crucial part of understanding what this novel is and of having the right expectations. I don't think it is necessary to go into it not knowing. In fact, I think it might help to have a certain knowledge of something coming, because it'll help adjust expectations and might be less jarring. And I won't reveal any specifics of what that looks like. I just will talk about it. So if you want to go in completely blind in that regard, you might want to read the book first and then come back if you feel so inclined. You might know Terry Hayes from his previous novel, I Am Pilgrim, which came out about 10 years ago and was very, very successful. It's a huge, 900-page book, also a spy thriller that is a page-turner. I haven't read it yet, actually, but I've heard very good things from a lot of different people. You might also know him as a screenwriter. He's a quite prolific, successful screenwriter. He worked, amongst other things, on Mad Max. The really cool thing about my experience reading this book was that I actually got to meet Terry Hayes because he was in Dublin for a couple of days doing a talk, interview, book launch thing in Dublin Castle for the book festival that we had on this month. And he also stopped by the bookshop that I work in to sign some copies, and I got to chat to him because I had a little bookseller arc snippet, which was just of part one, and it has 4 parts, so it was 25% of the book. But I had already been reading it a couple of days before it came out, so I got to chat to him a little bit, and I was halfway through and I told him, and he said, "Oh my god, I can't give you your money back." But then he said, when you get to part 4, there's going to be a time where you think, what the fuck is he doing? But please trust me and bear with me. I was like, okay, what does that mean? He was also kind enough to sign my copy. I'll just show you right here. And he said that if I like it, I should tell all my friends about it. So here I am telling my friends about it. And I'm going to tell you that if you're really enjoying it, there's going to be a time in part 4 that you think, what the fuck is he doing? What the fuck was she talking about? Trust him and keep going. So, what is it about? It's a spy thriller. It is not a sequel to I Am Pilgrim. It's completely disconnected, a standalone. And it starts in a way that reminded me kind of the TV show Homeland. Like, we're doing covert CIA operations. The main character is a denied access area spy. So, essentially that means that he goes into the most difficult and dangerous places and takes on the most difficult and dangerous missions. The interesting thing is that he is also emotionally stable and has a relationship and is a relatively grounded person within the grand scheme of things. So there's no dramatic fucking up his social life, his personal life storyline, which I actually found kind of refreshing, and he managed to make the character interesting regardless, which was kind of cool. And essentially the main plot line throughout the first half of the book is that we're looking for this extremely dangerous terrorist who was thought to be dead but actually isn't. And it's meticulously paced and plotted. This is a person who knows what he's doing, who knows what the flow of a story has to be. I could not stop reading it. The chapters are pretty short, and it gives you a lot of momentum, and it really scratched an itch that I didn't realize I had for this kind of monumental spy story. I really like spy stories, like when they're well crafted and have that good balance between action but also very intelligently written scenes of people in rooms talking about a problem and trying to figure it out, which is one of the things I enjoy the most in fiction. The thing that I kept saying is that you can tell that it took him almost a decade to write this book. This is not a book that could have been written in a year or two or in 6 months, because a lot of thought went into exactly how it had to be laid out, and I just really appreciate that. And if that was all that the book was, it would still have been a 5-star, really solid, fun spy thriller that would have been a candidate for one of my favorite books of the year. But for better or worse, that will be every individual's decision. That is not all that the book is. And in the second half, he takes us into a really interesting direction that I don't think you can predict, and that's what's especially bold about it. So I was lucky enough to get to attend the talk that Terry Hayes gave in Dublin Castle 2 weeks ago, and he talked about his process writing this book and coming up with the book, and he kept bringing up the word bold. He wanted it to be bold and different, and he used the word color, like he didn't want it to be your expected standard story, if a really good one of its kind. And the result truly is something that I have never read before. And let's talk about genre and genre blending. There are science fiction thrillers, and a name that comes to mind is Blake Crouch. He writes fast-paced thrillers that happen to deal with science fiction concepts. It's not super heavy on the science, but it's very clear from the blurb and from like the first page where those stories are going. What Terry Hayes is doing here is quite different, because it sets out as a very grounded in our current, present, real world and its problems and dynamics. And then it slowly progresses and turns into something else, and that something else is science fiction. And I think that this could very well work or not work at all for any given reader, depending on what your expectations are. And I think a lot of people that have read I Am Pilgrim that go into the Year of the Locust are going to want something similar and going to get something similar for the first half of the book. And then around the 60% mark, things start being hinted at and happening that make you go, hold on, what? Where are we going? Is this just a bit of a flavoring to it, or is it going to be more? And then it gets more and more and more, and it can be a bit odd and jarring. And as I think back on it, it's such an interesting experiment, because it is 2 books, but very much telling one story. But the 2 sides are so different because it sits on the cusp of present and future, if that makes any kind of sense. And it plays with the idea that when what we think of as science fiction arrives, we don't know it has arrived yet, so we never quite know that we're already living in the future. I don't know if that makes any kind of sense, but what I'm talking about is, for example, just thinking of a movie like Oppenheimer. In that movie, we're following the people involved in the creation of the atomic bomb. But for regular people that didn't know that that was happening, they didn't realize that the world had already changed forever. And that is kind of what we're playing with in this book, I think, where it is set in our real present, and he is kind of saying this could be, in theory, our real present, but we would not know about it because we have yet to learn that the world has changed forever. And I think that's a really interesting concept to play with, but also one that not everybody is going to be on board with, because it does fundamentally change the nature of the story that's being told and doesn't wrap things up the way a regular spy thriller would. I loved it. I loved it because it was different and because I happen to love both genres that he is tapping into here, and they're both genres that I have not been reading enough of. I also think that not any author would have been allowed to do that. That maybe if somebody else had come with this pitch to an editor or to a publisher, they would have said, split that into two. You either tell the first half of the story or the second half of the story, but pick a tone, pick a genre and stick to it, because people are not going to be on board. So I think it's really cool that a book like that is out there. I think it's interesting what decision was made in terms of marketing, and that the decision was made not to reveal that it is a genre blend and to advertise it as a crime thriller, because that is targeting a specific audience. And I think a lot of that audience is going to be maybe disappointed with it. Maybe I'm not trusting people enough. Maybe I should. But I certainly think that Terry Hayes succeeded at being bold. I think my one criticism in my experience of reading it is that the main antagonist kind of becomes a bit cartoony for my taste towards the end, and he kind of lost his sense of menace that I got from him in the earlier parts that he's in. I'm not sure if that was intentional, that maybe the threat is supposed to move onto other things. So in that sense, it might not be a flaw of the book, but I just think it's something that I do think about. I finished it about 2 weeks ago now, so I've had some time to sit on it and reflect, and I do keep thinking about it, which is always a good sign. But yeah, I think I'm not entirely sure I love the choices around where that character specifically went. But other than that, I really liked our main character. I got really attached to him. I also really like the side characters. They're all distinct. I don't think this is a huge cast, really, of people that you get super close to, but the ones that are recurring, I really liked. And yeah, I just haven't read anything like this. I haven't read anything like this year. I don't think I've read anything like it ever, to be honest. And I'm not entirely sure who I would recommend this book to, because I happen to be someone who enjoys every part of it, but I think a lot of people would enjoy either one half or the other half, or not be entirely certain about how they go together. But I think he's trying to say things, and it's a bit of a cautionary tale in some ways, which is interesting as well. And I've been reading and watching some science fiction recently that reminded me of it, and makes me think about humanity and this impulse that we sometimes have to not be satisfied and to continue being curious and always want to know more, and sometimes that's to our detriment. And anyway, it's a very interesting book. It's also a really fun book. Like I said, it's expertly, masterfully plotted and paced. I was very impressed by the pacing. It slows down and then it accelerates, and then there's a burst of energy, and then it pulls you back, and then it slows back down, and then it directs you one way, it directs you another way. And I was just along for the ride. It's a true epic, and I really loved reading it. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, please go ahead and pick up a copy. It's a fascinating book. It's out in the UK and Ireland, and by extension Europe, at least in English. I'm not sure about Australia, but I know that in the US it's actually out in February of next year, so you have that to look forward to. If nothing else, this is a book that is interesting because it's doing something different, and it can incite conversation no matter where you land on the side of enjoyment, about what stories and authors are allowed to do in terms of how they want to tell them, but also about other things and like where humanity's going and stuff like that. This is sounding very philosophical, and I had not intended it to become that, but here we are. So anyway, let me know. Have you read The Year of the Locust? Have you read I Am Pilgrim? Are you interested in reading it? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments and chat to you there. Like the video if you liked it, all that stuff, you know the drill. Consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. So if you want to go in completely blind in that regard, you might want to leave.